Well, hi there, everyone, and welcome to our very first Google Hangout on air. We've never done this before. I've never done this before, and so what I am interested to find out is how this works out. But we decided that we are going to run a couple of free live sessions, live events here through the Google uh, and YouTube on air, Google Hangouts on air. And what we wanted to do in this first one is just cover some of the initial configuration of a Cisco ISE device that's in VMware. So before I get into that, what I just wanted to do for a moment here is just talk about who we are, who I am, and give you a little bit of background about me and about Global Config technology solutions. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Brandon Carroll, and I am CCIE number 23837. I am, for the most part, independent as far as who I work for. I do consult and I do teach for the most part, full-time training and consulting, but I run Global Config Technology Solutions. It's a Cisco learning partner. It is my company, and what I try to do is, rather than just dump all kinds of training courses out there, what I do is I focus on the courses that I think are going to be the best niche for me as far as how I can help people. Over the years, since I've been a trainer since 2001, I've taught everything from the CCNA level, the entry level stuff, all the way up to the expert level. I am a CCIE in security, so I do have CCIE security classes that are custom, and I also do the CCNA classes because one of the things I really enjoy is helping folks get into networking starting out at that entry level. So what I did want to do for a moment here is just take you over to our website. I'm going to just share that out with you here for a moment. And over here on the globalconfig.net website, we do feature the 2195 all-out CCNA package, where you do get the CCNA as well as a couple other little goodies along with it. But we do have a blog. It's a technical blog, and I urge you to check out some of the posts there. And also under training courses, what you'll see is our current offerings. Like I said, we try to stay trim and focused, although we are doing quite a bit of the CCNP security, those brand new NP security courses. But for the most part, you can find the ones that we focus on the most: the CCNA Accelerated, which is for those entry-level candidates, as well as the CCIE Security Written Exam Bootcamp and our Lab Exam Bootcamp. But you can go ahead and subscribe. We also offer some video-based training through a members area, but generally that comes with a class that somebody takes. So if you take the class with us, we try to do the recordings and then provide that to you afterwards so that you can go back in and review things. So that's a little bit about Global Config. We're a real small company, and it's basically my life. So I hope you enjoy the products that we put together for you. You'll also find that there is some CCIE security written exam video lessons on pluralsight.com that I've authored, and there should be more to come very soon. So anyhow, with that said, let's get right into exactly what it is that we came here to talk about, or what it is that you're probably here to check out, and that is Cisco Identity Services Engine. I've done a number of ISE implementations, and none of them have gone, I don't think, completely smooth. I don't know that they technically could, but and that's simply because there's so many variables that come into play with ISE. But what I decided to do as we go through this is I wanted to go through just a little bit of an installation so that maybe you could work this up in a lab. There are other videos out there on how to set ISE up and whatnot, but I'm hoping that as I go through this and I show you just in this very small lab that I've got set up here in the office, as I go through this information, what I'm hoping is that you might glean some little bits of information from me, perhaps something that I've come across in the field there, some real-world examples of what could happen when you implement ISE. So that's really what my goal is here with the training. Like I said, I like to be able to help people get a start. And if you're working on ISE, then you probably don't need the start. You're probably already been in networking for a while, so hopefully I can fill in some gaps for you as far as ISE goes. So that's really what I'm shooting to do here. So let's jump on back over here, and what I want to do is just give you a couple of slides, and then I'm going to take you into some documentation, and then we're going to take you into my lab. So let's go back here to where we were before and go ahead and pull up the screen share. So at this point, I'm really hoping that you are able to see the Cisco ISE installation and basic setup slide here, because like I said, we've not used Google Hangouts before, so this is of course a little bit foreign here to me, and I'm sure that as time goes by, it'll only get better. So that's basically where we're at here. So let's give this just a moment, make sure that we are broadcasting here. Okay, so what I want to go through with you in this basic installation, in this basic setup is, first of all, we're going to go through a partial install of ISE 1.2 on ESXi 5.5 that I've got sitting here in a lab. The reason that I say it's a partial install is because some of the initial, I guess, installation I've started doing already, simply because it would take a pretty long time to go through and just sit there and watch all these screens update. So I don't want to bore you with that information. But what I do want to cover with you is the installation from the time where you type setup to begin. Go through a basic ISE configuration from the command line there, make sure we can get to the GUI, and then just configure a switch and a controller, or at least look at a controller to get you to the point where you can get in and we can start to configure this. If possible, we're going to integrate with Active Directory. We'll kind of see how things go there. And then if you have some chat, Q&A, and things along those lines, we'll go ahead and let you do that as well. But basically, as far as the installation of ISE goes on ESXi 5.5, the configuration details I don't think need to be put into a slide and then shown here for you so that you can sit and, oh, okay, let me write down everything that he said I need to do. The fact of the matter is, this is all covered in Cisco documentation. There's absolutely no reason that I should have to recreate that wheel, reinvent the wheel on it. In fact, they're very specific to VMware as well. So it's nice to be able to go in and look at that document, and I'll go ahead and do that now. I'll go ahead and click us into that document, and you can see here that it takes us out to the Cisco website, and this is installing release 1.2 software with a VMware virtual machine. So as I said, it's not that difficult to find the documentation on this, and all the information's here. Really don't need to reinvent the wheel as far as this configuration goes. Where I do want to point you to in this document is right around in this area here, preparing a VMware system for ISE software installation. And so that'll kind of talk about getting some things set up, what you need to do as far as your VMware system goes. I've basically got mine configured with this 4 gigs of RAM, the 4 CPUs, basically have it set up with 100 gigs of memory, or 100 gigs of storage space, rather than the 200 gigs that's recommended, because I'm not using this in a production environment. But if you read through this document, of course, it's going to get you through the recommendations. The next thing that I did after I built the virtual machine, which, by the way, that virtual machine, if I come on back here to the slides, that virtual machine is, come back here, I hit a button just a little bit too fast. That virtual machine is a Red Hat Linux 5 VM. It is 4 gigs of RAM, 100 gigs of disk space for the lab, 2 CPUs, 2 cores each. Real basic, right? So I built that installation there. And then after that, I went ahead and I mounted the ISO. So I had installed the ISO already. I had that ISO uploaded to my ESX server. I mounted it, and then you want to make sure that you connect it power on once you're done. So as you go through the install, I can actually kind of take you through that. In fact, there's no reason why I shouldn't. Let me jump on over here to VMware. And actually, this is a console for my ICE server, but what I want to show you, let me just get this set up here. It's pretty easy to go through the install. I'll just walk you through it real quick. I'm not going to do the whole boot and run through all of that stuff. But basically, you create a new virtual machine. And as you create this new virtual machine, new VM for live demo, I'll call this one. Select your data store. You're going to pick your operating system. So I'm going to go Linux, and I'm going to change mine to a Red Hat Linux 5 64-bit version. I'll go ahead and hit next. Then I'm going to add the NIC cards that I want. I'm going to go ahead and add 2 NIC cards. This is what I did with mine. And then I set them to the VLANs that I'm concerned about, or that I want to be included in the ICE configuration. From there, you go ahead and set your virtual disk size. Like I said, I set mine to 100 gig. And then rather than go ahead and finish the configuration here, what I did is I edit the virtual machine settings before I finish up here. I click on continue. And then here is where I go ahead and change the memory size to 4 gigs. I change the CPUs to my 2 cores, or my 2 virtual sockets and my 2 cores per socket, so a total number of 4 cores. And then I go to the CD, I change it to a data store ISO file, and then simply navigate into my ISO folder and grab that ICE 1.2.1.198 image and make sure I set that to connect it power on. And as far as just a simple install goes, that's all I do. Now I've got a new ICE image waiting for me to just boot it up and get going. Now I'll show you what happens when you boot it up. This is pretty simple. I'll go ahead and start this VM and click over here on the console. And then inside the console, you can see it kind of unpacks. And what it's going to end up doing is taking me to a page where it asks me what type of install I want to do. And the type of install I want to do, because of the interface that I have here, is just a keyboard type of an install rather than through a terminal session. I'm not going to leave this booting. It'll go ahead and boot it here. I guess I will leave it and let you see it. It's not going to hurt anything if we take a look here. Okay, so it boots the ADEOS, which is the application development engine. So ICE, for those of you that don't know, ICE is an application that runs on top of ADEOS. And so like I said, this takes a little bit of time. I'm actually not going to do it. Let's go ahead and stop that, just because I've already got all of that to the point where this VM is ready for us to actually start interacting with it and giving it some info. So let me minimize this, and let's come back over here to this console connection. And I'll go ahead and make that console connection a little larger on the screen here. Okay, so once you go through the initial install where it copies out that ADEOS and all of its files to the disk, it's going to leave you at a prompt like this where it tells you to type setup to configure the appliance. That's pretty simple. You just type setup, and then you go from here. Now, it's going to want a host name. The host name, my experiences have been case sensitive. I think that's always been the case, but I'm just throwing that out there because most of the course material where it actually points out that it's case sensitive is old 1.1 course material, and I'm talking specifically about the SISE course, which is one of the courses that I teach. But at the same time, this is 1.2, and I've always just followed the it's case sensitive rule. So I'm going to call this ICE1, and I'll go ahead and hit enter, and then it's going to want the IP address of ICE1. Now, I have everything prepared in my lab before I even start messing around with ICE. And when you go out on an implementation, you're probably going to want to do the same thing. You're probably going to want to make sure that DNS is set up, that all your DNS resolutions available. NTP needs to be there. Active Directory, a certificate authority, all this kind of stuff needs to be there. And I'll tell you what, I've had a number of customers that want to install ICE in a nearly production environment, but they don't have all the pieces. And in my experiences, it just makes it a little more difficult. So I recommend that you install ICE in a way where the environment it's installed in looks just like an ICE environment or a production environment. Because if you're missing pieces and then you try to take ICE and move it over, you're probably going to run into some issues. But hey, you may be able to overcome those issues. The times that I've had to do it that way, I've had to overcome those issues, and it's just kind of part of what we do. So next thing we're going to do is enter the IP address. So I'm going to go 192.168.1.167. That's the address of my ICE that is already configured in my DNS server. It's already configured for my domain as far as who this device is. I'm going to add the net mask, which in this case is just a simple 255.0 net mask. The default gateway is .1, 192.168.1.1. The default DNS domain is gcts.local for me here. And of course, you're going to want to make sure you get all the stuff right before you run through your installation. My primary name server is 192.168.1.100. That is my DNS server. That's also my Active Directory server, and that's also my NTP server. I do not want to add a secondary name server, so I'm just going to hit enter here. And the NTP server I'm going to configure is going to be ntp.gcts.local. And so as long as my name resolution is working okay there, I should be able to resolve that back to 192.168.1.100. I don't want to add another NTP server. By the way, if you're thinking about NTP servers and security, you can add security to your NTP servers, but you're going to do that after you get logged in to ICE through the GUI interface. It's also recommended that you use a common time zone, especially if you're doing a distributed deployment and you're installing ICE over different time zones. Make sure that you set them all up for the same time zone so that you don't have any time issues. I've run into that a number of times. It causes some problems with integration with Active Directory and the sync between the ICE devices as well. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter and leave this set to UTC. I will go ahead and enable the SSH service so that I can SSH directly to the command line later on. I'm going to create a new username. I'll call this username admin, and I'm just going to create a password here that is something that I will recognize. I'll do it to the most natural password that I have so that as I go through this demonstration here, it doesn't cause me to stumble a little bit forgetting the passwords. First thing I do pretty much always is I forget passwords. Okay, so now this is going to bring up the network interface, and it's going to test connectivity to the network and see if it's able to reach the NTP or really the DNS server, the gateway, do some resolution there. And provided these come back up okay, if it can ping the gateway, if it can get to the DNS server, which is what you see happening right now, then we'll go ahead and finish with the installation. Now, like I said, this is a device that's only halfway through the install, so we're not really done here. Now, it does detect that a VMware machine is present, which you can see there, and we're going to go ahead and install VMware tools. So it'll go through this install process, and then we'll wrap up the install. So we'll sit here for just a moment and let this install go ahead and complete. While the install is going through the motions here, I'm going to take us on back to some of these slides here that we were looking at, and we can discuss some other points related to the installation. And so first of all, supporting devices. I already mentioned this, but again, I'd like to just talk about it again, and that's the fact that If you're going to do AD integration, then you're going to want to have that AD server available. You need to know the domain, and you're going to have to know a user credential on that domain that's allowed to add and delete computer objects. So basically, you're going to add ISE to Active Directory as an object there. If you were going to remove it, he'd need the privileges to remove that. ISE is also going to go into Active Directory and retrieve information. It's going to pull out group information. It's going to pull out attributes about your objects in there. And then those values can be used in your policies that we'll write. And we're going to do policies in the next live event. Now, the next thing that we see on this list here is the CA server. You're going to need to have a CA server configured if you want to do any type of EAP authentication that is certificate-based. You're going to need a CA server if you're going to do any BYOD. If you decided that you're going to support that in your environment. You're also going to need the Network Device Enrollment Service, the SCEP enrollment, Simple Certificate Enrollment Protocol. Basically, you need to be able to support having ISE use like a proxy enrollment to go get a certificate for a BYOD user. And so that's why I pointed out here that we would want the NDES service installed on the CA server as well. Now, as far as CA certificates goes, ISE is going to generate its own certificate. The certificate that ISE is going to generate will be a self-signed certificate, and it's not going to be trusted by your everyday browser. It's not going to be trusted. So what you're probably going to want to do is go get a certificate from a trusted third party. And so you can go out to any number of third parties out there. You could go out to DigiCert, which is one that I like. I've had a lot of customers work with GoDaddy, VeriSign, and so on. When it comes to those certificates, it's okay to get a individual identity certificate for each ISE and install that, but you might also be interested in getting a wildcard certificate. And in ISE 1.2, wildcard certificates are supported. The catch there when you create the wildcard certificate is that you're going to want to make sure that the SAN, the subject alternative name of the certificate, includes the host names of your primary and secondary ISE, or if it's standalone, includes the host name of ISE. And you can also add in there any other URLs that you might be using for, say, sponsor portal configuration or the My Devices portal, things along those lines. So with that said, let's come on back over here and look at our next point. The next point that I wanted to discuss here throughout the slides was simply the NTP server. NTP is important when it comes to ISE. The reason I say that NTP is important is because if you can't synchronize, your time is not accurate, you're going to have, first of all, certificate problems. You're also going to have issues with integration with Active Directory. AD time has to be synchronized within 5 minutes, or ISE will not sync. And you're also going to probably have issues with when you're doing all of your backups and things along those lines if your time is off. So make sure that NTP server is available. Make sure that you can get there and that it's reachable. And then finally, the DNS server. With your DNS server, the recommendation that I have for you on that is that you have your A records configured ahead of time for things like ISE and NTP and Active Directory or whatever you're going to be using there, but also the reverse lookups. Make sure that you support reverse lookups, because reverse lookups will be used down the road with ISE Profiler service, so that ISE can do reverse lookups on host devices and do address resolution and things along those lines. So that's a little bit of a look at the supporting devices there. All right, so let me get back over here and let's see where we're at with our ISE install. And it looks like ISE is still in the process of unbundling the application package. So Unfortunately, this install isn't like a quick zippity install. It's just not. So it takes a little bit of time to get this initial install done. Nice thing about it is once it's done, it's done. So we got about half of it done. We're just waiting on the remainder of it here. But there are a number of things that I wanted to point out to you as we were waiting for this. So let's go ahead and come back on over here and let's talk about those things. I'm going to come back over here to my slide set. And the other elements that I wanted to talk to you about before we kind of get into the rest of the hands-on is network access devices. So back in the days, we used to have the Cisco Access Control Server, and really I shouldn't say that because we still do, but ACS used to configure in there what we call AAA clients, right? That's what we're talking about in the form of a network access device. We're really talking about a AAA client. Now, so as far as AAA clients goes with ISE, we're going to need to configure ISE for the, well, we're going to configure the switch config, which is going to have all the radius settings. It's going to talk back to ISE, and we're also going to have a wireless controller that's going to have to be configured to talk back to ISE. Now, as far as the settings go, this is another one of those things where I could recreate the wheel. Now, I don't want to have to recreate the wheel, but I could. I could go through, make a bunch of slides, and then from there say, all right, here's exactly what you're going to do on the switch configuration. I don't think I need to do that simply because of the fact that Cisco has put together some really good documentation for us on what we need to set up on the switch, what we need to set up on the controllers, and really each different aspect of our configuration. Cisco has some really good how-to guides that take us through how to do that. But sometimes those guides aren't enough. Sometimes it's nice to actually see it in a live network there. The other thing is that once we have the switch and the controller configured, these devices need to be added to ISE as network devices, and they have a common pre-shared key between them so that ISE can communicate with them. So that's the network access device side. Now, from the switch perspective, the document that you're going to be looking for is the universal switch configuration. I'm going to go ahead and click on this link. It's going to take me out directly to that PDF, and that PDF will take us through every single bit of content that is going to be relevant from a kind of global configuration perspective, and then also on the interface. So here I've got, for example, global settings, and we're beginning with the HTTP server. We're enabling the HTTP server. We need to do this as far as HTTP configuration because this service will be required later on when we do our HTTP redirects, when we do things like our guest authentication. So we'll need to set this up. Some other things that we're going to need to do is enable the AAA process, which is what you see happening here. The AAA process, we're going to have to set up things like where .1x authentications should go. Well, we want them to go to radius. Where should my network authorization go? Where should those requests go? We also want those to go to radius. The reason for that is because radius is the protocol that ISE is going to use to communicate with network devices. We also have a counting configuration, and that's what you see here. So I'm going to walk through my configuration. I'm going to use this document as I do it. So let's come on back over here and check out ISE and see where ISE is at. So we're going through now the initial application install. And like I said, I don't know how this is going to turn out as far as time goes, but what we might do is let this install finish, and then we'll just insert another live event tomorrow to go through the remainder of this because sometimes these things are going to take a little bit of time, and I don't want to kind of just kill it with a lengthy video of you watching me do nothing. So at any rate, coming on back over here to the slides for a couple minutes. I'll cover the rest of the slides that I want to go through. Then we're going to check the install, and if the install is not finished, then we'll go ahead and end the broadcast today, and we'll finish the configuration in a new live event tomorrow, and then we'll come back on Wednesday and we'll do the authentication and authorization settings. Now, The other things that I wanted to point out to you, the other points of interest with just kind of initial getting things going, is the Active Directory integration lets me specify a single Active Directory server. If you wanted to add more than one AD server, then what we're going to do is add additional AD servers as an LDAP server. When we go through the setup, we're going to add a domain. There's a test option. We'll go ahead and test that configuration. And then there's a join option that lets us join the domain. That's where you're going to be needing those credentials to get in there and add ISE as an object to Active Directory. Once that's done, we can bring in our attributes and we can bring in our groups. So the summary of what would be basic installation, as far as I'm concerned, for just getting things up and running to a point where we can start configuring some authentications, maybe seeing something happen, is we install ISE. We go through the command line there and we define those basic settings. That was the NTP server, the time zone, the host name, the domain name, that type of stuff, the IP address of ISE. We then go ahead and configure a switch to talk to ISE. We configure a controller perhaps to talk to ISE. We configure ISE to talk to the switch and the controller if we've added that. And then we integrate with Active Directory so that we have an external database that we can authenticate our users with. So that's basic settings. Let's come back and look at ISE one more time, and if ISE isn't finished, which it's not, we'll go ahead and end the broadcast with this. When we come back in the next live broadcast, we're going to pick right up from ISE install being finished to adding a switch, configuring the switch, adding a controller, configuring the controller, and then integrating with Active Directory. So like I said, our first run here at these Google Hangouts, and wasn't sure exactly how things were going to go, but I did want to go ahead and get the ball rolling with these live events so that we could bring you some content there, showing you how to configure things like ISE, and then down the road we'll go into some perhaps CCNA lessons, some live CCNA lessons, and so on. But that will go ahead and end today's broadcast. We'll wait for ISE to finish, and we'll see you back here tomorrow if you're able to join as we go through the remainder of the configuration of Cisco ISE basic installation. Thanks for joining. My name is Brandon Carroll with Global Config Technology Solutions, and you can find us on the web at globalconfig.net.